Finally, India and China have clinched a border deal.
Agreement has been arrived at on patrolling arrangements.
Both countries have reached an arrangement on patrolling along a disputed frontier in the Himalayas.
The disengagement process with China, you can say, has been completed.
Welcome, this is Najma Minhas with GBS Dialogue. India and China have reached a landmark agreement to ease the tensions along their disputed border. This marks the end of a 4-year military standoff between the two countries. This could open the door for improved political and business ties between the two Asian giants, just as Prime Minister Modi prepares to meet President Xi at the upcoming Brics summit on October the 22nd to the 24th. And during this meeting, he is expected to hold talks with the Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Now, as a result of the discussions that have taken place over the last several weeks, an agreement has been arrived at on patrolling arrangements along the line of actual control in the India-China border areas. And this is leading to disengagement and eventually a resolution of the issues that had arisen in these areas in 2020.
The relations between the world's two most populous nations, both nuclear powers, have been strained since the clashes between their troops on what is a largely undemarcated frontier in the western Himalayas. It left 20 Indians and 4 Chinese soldiers dead in June 2020 in the Galwan Valley. And it was the first such deadly clash between the two countries in over 4 decades. Both countries in the past 4 years have moved tens of thousands of new troops and military equipment to these freezing highlands. To avoid clashes, now the two militaries will patrol contested points along the border according to an agreed schedule to avoid face-offs between each other. And they are expected to have monthly review meetings and regular monitoring of the contested areas by both sides to ensure that there is no violation. The Indian Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar announced this decision during his session at the NDTV Media Conclave, where he said that the disengagement process with China has been completed.
An agreement on patrolling, and with that, the disengagement, we have gone back to where the situation was in 2020, and we can say with that the disengagement, you can say, has been completed.
It was kept totally confidential by both sides, and up to the point of my recording this vlog, the Chinese side has still not confirmed the news. But it totally makes sense as well, because both sides know there are many groups and nations that would be ready to throw a spanner in the works, as you would say. The agreement is crucial to restoring relations between the two countries that had distracted them towards working towards what we could describe as the Asian century. This is the famous description that was used by Mahathir Mohamad, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia. And he wanted to describe this as the 21st century being a period where Asia, which was particularly driven by countries like China and India and Southeast Asia, where they would dominate the global affairs both economically and politically. It is this Asian century that Western countries like the United States, who is obviously currently the global hegemon, which views this as a foreboding, as its downfall going forward, and is doing everything to prevent it. The policymakers in Foggy Bottom in Washington, D.C., and their enablers in the Washington think tanks will be viewing what has just happened between China and India with a negative lens and thinking about how to reset this narrative. I hope you will like, share, and subscribe to the content on this channel if you are enjoying the video. Your engagement is key to helping the channel grow. The 2020 standoff between China and India occurred along what is called the Line of Actual Control, the LAC. It's in the western sector in the Himalayan region of the Ladakh state. The LAC is not a clearly demarcated international boundary, but is rather an informal separation that emerged after the Sino-Indian War of 1962. It spans around 3,500 kilometers or around 2,700 miles. And the core issue behind the conflict lies in these territorial disputes along the LAC. Both countries have long-standing claims over the regions of Aksai Chin, which is controlled by China, but claimed by India, and the Arunachal Pradesh area, which is controlled by India, but the whole region is claimed by China, who calls it South Tibet. Now, at the time, India was putting millions into infrastructural developments along the border. Particularly, India was constructing roads and airstrips, which China viewed as provocative. The 2020 border standoff between China and India had significant social and economic fallouts, affecting both populations in each country. They started viewing each other extremely negatively, and ignited strong nationalist sentiments in China, in India in particular, where people started asking for the widespread boycotts of Chinese goods and increased the public support for a government's tougher stance on China. It also affected trade relations, investments, and the technology sector between the two countries. And it basically influenced India's strategic economic policies towards China, particularly in the areas of technology, investment, and supply chains, as India adopted a more protectionist stand and sought to diversify its economic partners and promote domestic industries at the same time. So Chinese firms face setbacks in one of their most important overseas markets. India and China are major trading partners, but the standoff led to calls within India to reduce the economic dependence on China. In 2020, India imposed new trade barriers and increased scrutiny on Chinese imports, which slowed down the clearance for goods at Indian ports. There was also strong public sentiment in India to boycott these Chinese products. The movement gained significant traction on social media, impacting Indian consumer demand for Chinese goods, particularly in the smartphone, electronics, and the automotive sectors. Now, while India took measures to reduce imports from China, it was very challenging to implement many of these restrictions due to the heavy reliance it had on Chinese goods in key sectors like the electronics, pharmaceuticals, and machinery. China remains India's biggest source of goods and was its largest supplier of industrial products last year. Indian imports from China have surged over 50% since 2020 border clash, nearly doubling the New Delhi's trade deficit with Beijing. So they weren't as successful to move away from China as they would have liked, as is the case most across the world with most countries. However, one of the most significant actions that was taken by India was the ban on Chinese apps, starting with TikTok and WeChat, and it eventually expanded to over 200 Chinese apps. The Indian government at the time cited the data privacy and national security concerns for removing these apps. It hit major Chinese technology companies and developers financially, as India was one of the largest markets for these apps, including TikTok, which had over 200 million active users in the Indian market at the time. Now, this followership has more or less died after the ban, as Indians have moved to the Western created apps, including Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. The ban and regulatory restrictions by the Indian government also discouraged Chinese investments in India's growing tech startup ecosystem. Until that point, China had been a significant investor in Indian startups, particularly in sectors like e-commerce, fintech, and ride-hailing services like Uber, for example, that we see here in the United States. It is estimated that Chinese investors had over $4 billion cumulatively in Indian startups across these various sectors in 2020. Chinese investments in Indian startups had been increasing in the years going up to 2020. And there was an estimate that of the 18 of India's 30 unicorns, which startups valued at over $1 billion, actually received Chinese funding. However, after April 2020, when India revised its foreign direct investment policy due to what the Chinese had been doing, investments from countries, and the policy basically said that investments from countries that share a land border with India require prior government approval for investment. In essence, they were basically targeting Chinese investment because not many other land border countries were putting in too much money into India. Can you imagine how much money Pakistan or Bangladesh were? Anyway, Chinese investment is extremely low now, and many big Chinese companies such as Alibaba, Tencent, and the others actively divested from the Indian market due to many of these reasons. One of the major affectees was Huawei, who had been a major player in the Indian telecom market up to its 4G stage. However, in 2021, when India conducted its 5G trials, both Huawei and ZTE, another Chinese telecoms company, were not included in the equipment manufacturers list. Instead, Indian telecom companies partner with non-Chinese vendors like Ericsson from Sweden, Nokia from Finland, and Qualcomm and Cisco from the United States. Now, this move perfectly aligned with what the United States wanted. It had already been voicing security concerns about the involvement of Chinese firms in critical telecommunications infrastructure and had been pressurizing allies to follow suit both in the United Kingdom and Europe. The 2020 border clash had a significant and long-lasting impact on the political relations between India and China. It marked a low point in their bilateral relationship, with both countries adopting a more cautious and confrontational stances towards each other. There was an obvious deterioration of diplomatic ties. Prime Minister Modi had, up to that point, been vaunting his relations with President Xi. Between 2014 till 2020, he'd visited China 5 times, the most by any Indian Prime Minister in 70 years. He had over 18 meetings with President Xi, and it was seen as a disastrous slap on his bear-hugging diplomacy and generally led to a hardening of India's stance against China. India's foreign policy saw a shift towards greater alignment with powers that shared its concerns with China. The political relationship between India and China basically became defined by what is a strategic distrust, with both countries wary of each other's interests, not only along the LAC, but also in the wider geopolitical arena. India became part of the United States Indo-Pacific strategy almost wholesale, which is primarily aimed at countering China's influence in the region. Indian relations with the United States, Japan, Australia, and the broader Quad, as it's known, was strengthened during this period as it sought to counterbalance China's regional influence. The clash exponentially accelerated India's cooperation with the Quad, which up to that point had been somewhat slow. In many ways, it also limited the growing importance of Brics and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, in which the Indians saw the Chinese as assuming too much leadership for their liking. This in turn has slowed down the importance of these organizations in the world economy and politically, as of course was desired by the Western-led institutions who would like India not to play a role in these organizations as one of the leaders of the global South, which they think these organizations are essentially anti-Western or against Western interests at least. So my speculation, in fact, is that the appointment of the American Indian Ajay Banga as the head of the World Bank should also be seen in this light of appeasing India. We can give you a role in our institutions if you play ball with us. So the border tensions also complicated India's traditional balancing act between its relations with Russia and China. While India maintains close ties with Russia, which was re-emphasized by Dr. Jaishankar at the media conclave, the NDTV again today, and has done so on many occasions, China's growing partnership with Russia has complicated India's diplomatic maneuvering. However, this breakthrough on the eve of the Brics meeting in Russia bodes very well for the countries finally to put this incident behind them. And despite the broader geopolitical competition between the two nations, which is very natural because they are both regional powers with a growing military and economic influence, it allows them to move forward. So I would love to hear from you. Do you think this agreement will be sufficient for both countries to move on? Or do you think something else is also needed? Thank you for watching the video, and I hope you will like, share, and subscribe to the content on this channel. If you're enjoying this video or other videos, have a great day.